And why did the Soviet Union, if it was so wonderful, collapse? Someone asks this question using it as an argument. They say, it would be a good thing, it would not fall apart. And someone is really looking for an answer. And one of the most popular answers is the rebirth of the nomenclature. The Soviet bureaucracy and the bourgeoisie has become so much so that it needed to legitimize its position. And the Soviet Union, with its political structure and laws, interfered. Hence, as a result, the restoration of capitalism. It's hard to argue with this. Anyone who is at least a little familiar with the history of the Union understands that the Union was handed over from above. From above, the masses were prepared for this surrender. They've been cooking for years. Propaganda can serve the good, it can serve the bad, but it is the same effective tool. Trotsky's fans like to recall that, they say, in what years he predicted the collapse of the Soviet project, and called the bourgeois rebirth of the Soviet nomenclature the cause of this collapse. That's how it happened. And I don't think that's the answer. Of course, privileges are a social stratification, and if it cannot be overcome, it eventually leads to restoration sooner or later. It is much more interesting to answer the question, why did this very nomenclature abandon socialist ideals? It was the Soviet nomenclature, it was our people, not some kind of sense spies. The same people published the magazines Bolshevik, Communist University at Home, Crocodiles, Pioneer Truth. They also censored the International Panorama and after all, they were not sent enemies, but workers raised in a certain environment of the desks. Why did the Western lifestyle turn out to be more attractive for them? They eventually aspired to the same way of life. Yes. Tell me what you love. I wanted to put up a gazebo. There's a swimsuit on the premises. So the neighbor said, not modestly. And why, in fact, immodest? My father put on his boots for the first time, in military service. It's not that we haven't seen enough sugar, bread. You're right, Mikhail Kirillovich. Oh, you're right. Did I end up here right away? No. The village komsomol was created. I have known the peasants share in full. Then study, then Dnipropetrovsk Regional Committee. He directed the supply of Leningrad during the war. I don't know the horrors of the blockade from books. Then in Moldova, in the Council of Ministers. Nastiu. Now in Moscow. Well, tell me. Alarms, well. How is it needed? Well, if so, put it on, inflicted. Put my word law there. Hello. I'm on my own. Well, come on, come on. Let's try. Hello, honest company. Hi there, do you have Gennady, Mikhail Kirillovich? The eagle. What to do? The wife's son is in the States, the daughter is from Sweden. Sister dying, asked, don't leave Gennady. Lives with me. The guy is a zoologist. I arranged for him to get into it by car. It works. You would have helped to put it in the trade mission. Well, at least to Finland at first. He needs to be married. And what? Take it, daughter. Let's unscrew it, It's time for us to have our own births before the dynasty. Not everything is Oklahoma. To others, well, I think that everything has been decided about working abroad with Jenna. The issue of equal pay has been raised repeatedly. In theory, everything looks decent, but in practice, if the plant director receives the same 100 rubles as an ordinary worker, then he will face the question of responsibility. The salary is the same, the responsibility is much higher. And if there is a war tomorrow, the industry is transferred to military rails, and responsibility increases many times. There are not as many ideological people at the initial stage of building a new society as we would like. Motivation remains. And that means, whatever one may say, the plant director should receive more than a worker, and a talented designer should receive more than an ordinary engineer. And besides monetary motivation, there are other ways: housing, for example, vacations, and so on. So privileges at the first stages are inevitable, and social stratification, not the same, of course, as under capitalism, but still inevitable. It will not be possible for an opera singer or an outstanding athlete representing our country abroad to live the life of a miner. And the party workers were different. Someone was burning at work, and someone was handing out privileges to himself. But still, why, with all these privileges, did they look to the West? Why did it happen that even for people in the Soviet sense of the word well off, abroad remained more attractive? It would seem that if life under socialism is better than in the countries of the decaying West, and you are also endowed with privileges, so why then make so much effort to destroy this very life? I believe that the root cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union was the war. The USSR could win this war only in one case without joining it, and it was hardly possible. Yes, the Soviet people defeated fascism, and the war ended in Berlin. But we must remember that the Soviet Union was a state that existed in a hostile environment. The Union had to demonstrate not only the successes of the new formation to the whole world in the shortest possible time, but also really achieve them. It was literally a matter of survival. We transfer all means of production to public ownership. We are producing new means of production, mechanizing labor, enlarging agriculture, industrializing, improving the welfare of the people, reducing the working day, giving people the opportunity to devote more time to education, raising the cultural level, and sports. And then no chatter about gulags and totalitarianism will be able to hide our successes from the rest of the world. Building socialism in a single country is both necessary and possible, but only with the prospect of further accession of other countries. Otherwise, complete collapse and transformation into North Korea. Therefore, the fulfillment of the gigantic volume of tasks that were set before Soviet society did not even involve stopping, let alone regression. Therefore, the 22nd of June 1941 is literally the beginning of the end of the Soviet project. Millions of people worked hard to create the foundation of our future. And on the 22nd of June 1941, this foundation was blown up. Yes, of course, there were reparations after the war, and a lot of things were exported from Germany. But all this is absolute nonsense compared to the damage caused. And it's not just about the economy. Time was lost. The leading captains, on whose territory there was no war, went far ahead. In addition, ideology was dealt a crushing blow. Millions of communists died. Literally the bearers of ideas, the most educated, the most conscious, they were in the forefront. The war destroyed both the material and ideological basis of the new socialist society. And when a Soviet person saw that they could not produce good shoes in their native country, but in some Italy, which did not win the Great War and does not fly into space, they could, a Soviet person asked questions. And who saw this Italy in the first place? Abroad at all? Who was the first to start asking these questions? Employees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, embassies, permanent missions, officials from sports, trade, and so on. Employees of all kinds of residencies. They were the ones who brought doubts home. Where did Vladimir Putin work after studying in the KGB structures? What could he think about socialism when, in 1990, he was returning home from a long-term business trip abroad, just before the collapse of the Union? So the betrayal of the nomenclature is only a consequence, not a cause. Not having had time to overcome commodity production, the USSR did not have time to create conditions in which these privileges simply disappear automatically, are leveled. Conditions in which these privileges are simply not needed. And there remains only one question to answer. But will all this happen again in the future? Is it worth building socialism again if a new war can destroy all efforts again? Predict something. It's a complicated matter, but the presence of nuclear weapons and the guaranteed retaliatory destruction of the enemy is still a deterrent. On the 22nd of June, Kiev was bombed at exactly 4 o'clock. They announced to us that the war had begun, and it was bombed. They announced to us that the war had begun. The war started at dawn to kill more people. The parents were sleeping. They were sleeping in the children when they began to bomb Kiev. There were big avalanches of enemies. There were no forces to hold them. As soon as the lands of their native Ukraine entered, they began to kill people.